Speaker. Yeah, I think I better put the right way. I'm pleased to be here today to speak again on Bill C-46, an amendment to the Criminal Code, offense related to conveyances and impaired driving. And just short and whole title, we're dealing with impaired driving and a review of the old sections of the Criminal Code and updating it. And it's impaired driving with alcohol or a drug. Mr. Speaker, I was a policeman for 35 years, and I held breathalyzer operator certificate since 1970. And I think I've probably done well over in excess of 1,000 impaired driving cases, alcohol, and drugs. I think my first year I was just about 100 as a rookie. And you know, in those days, Mr. Speaker, I could do an impaired driving case, arrest the guy, bring him into the office, do up all the paperwork, and get back on the road between an hour and a half. Except once. I remember a case, and I just want to say this because this is how bad impaired drivers can be. I once remember a case where I arrested a guy for impaired driving, brought him back to the office, because the policy of the AG and the province was not to hold or detain or remove the vehicle from the road. So I brought him in, he blew .26. We had to release him, I released him. 15 minutes later, I see him driving down the road. I pick him up, bring him back to the office, process him, give him appearance notice because I cannot hold him, and we let him go. 20 minutes later, lo and behold, he drives by me again. This time I brought him in and arrested him. So impaired drivers have always been a very serious part of our society. Is impaired driving going down, whether it's with drugs or alcohol? It's debatable. We have to thank the work of groups like MAD, but I don't believe it's going down. And I'll tell you two specific reasons, Mr. Speaker. One, the time to process a simple impaired driving case takes anywhere from 3 to 4 hours and closer to 4. So the police officer is off the road for 4 hours to do the paperwork, to bring in it. And why does it take that long? Because of all the different legislation out there, all the different wording out there. He has to cross all his T's and dot all his I's to get that conviction there. And then I'm going to go the second one, and all we're doing right now, Mr. Speaker, is bringing in more legislation, more work for the lawyers to look at, and it's just going to complicate it that much more. The second thing is a deterrent. You know, back in 1950, I had the good fortune one time to find a court book from 1950 from Vancouver Island, and impaired drivers were being fined anywhere between $100 and $300 for an impaired driver in 1950. Now, the average salaries in 1950 were about $1,700. In 1970, the fines were still $100 to $300, but people were earning about $5,700. And today, the fine minimum is $1,000, and people are earning, average they say is $50,000, but I think it's a little bit higher than that. So there is no deterrent out there. People will think about driving and drinking. And you know, I have to comment on my honorable friend from St. Albert, Edmonton. I mean, he brought up at the committee that we needed to strengthen some of the legislation. An example, I have a 5-year mandatory sentence for someone who drives a vehicle while impaired and kills a person. Yet the Liberal government said no, voted against it. Right now, minimum fine under summary conviction is $1,000. Go up to the more serious one, which causes injury or death, it's $500 more. That is ridiculous. It was more effective many years ago than it is today. Impaired driving, here's some simple statistics for those in the room. 1 shot of whiskey is equal to 12 ounces of beer or a glass of wine. And a person, an average person, 140-pound woman, can handle 3 ounces in an hour, and she'd probably have a reading of 0.11, which would bring her 0.03 over the limit. A 140-pound man, and here's one place where I can say we might be just a little bit better than women. A 140-pound man having 3 ounces in an hour would have a .09 reading. And that's just because our dissipation system seems to be a little bit better. And we'll leave it at that, Mr. Speaker. Science gives us the ability to calculate the effects of alcohol. And I could sit down here with any person in this room, and if they told me what they had to drink, I could probably break it down and tell them what their reading is going to be. Section 245.01 of the Criminal Code, the new one we're talking about, states that the Attorney General may approve a device that is designed to ascertain the presence of alcohol in a person's blood, equipment that is designed to ascertain the presence of drug in a person's body, an instrument that is designed to receive and make an analysis of sample of a person's breath to determine the blood alcohol concentration. Well, we've already had A and C in existence since the 60s. B, we're told, well, some countries have some form of testing that they believe is correct. We are looking at that, and we are testing it right now, but it's not definite for sure. I do not believe we had enough scientific evidence out there. But we are going to go ahead with this law, and we're going to make marijuana legal. Still not scientifically proven that. Now, impaired driving under the Act, under 245, states any conveyance. So we're going to be able to go after anybody riding an electric bike, to an electric wheelchair, to an ATV, to a lawnmower, all the way up to a transport truck. All these people will be subject to the new rules and regulations that we're imposing, and some of them are going to be able to use legalized marijuana because of medical purposes, and others will use legalized marijuana because of recreational use. We all know that marijuana goes into the lungs, into your bloodstream, and then into the body, gets stored into the fats cells of your body. The sad part about it, different than alcohol, alcohol dissipates about 1 ounce to an average person per hour. So it's gone. If you have 3 drinks in an hour, probably 3 to 4 hours later, your body's clear of that alcohol. Not the marijuana. It stays in your brain tissue and in your fat system and can come up anytime you agitate the body or get excited. So what does marijuana do? Well, of course, it knocks the heck out of our senses, our sense of time, our moods, movements, thinking, ability to problem solve, and our memories. And if we overindulge in the use of marijuana, then we go into hallucinations, delusions, and psychosis. But most people will just be the former part, which is a form of impairment. You know, the University of Duke University in New Zealand did a number of tests in the last few years with young people. And I'm just saying this, thank you. I'm just saying this because what they've proven is that those kids using marijuana on a regular basis had an IQ 8 points less than their counterparts that did not use it. That's already a form of impairment right there. According to Colorado State University, the tests that they've done over the last few years show that the THC levels of marijuana has increased over 30% in the past 20 years. It's much stronger than it used to be. Another form of impairment. My concerns is the marijuana stays in your body for 3 to 10 days immediately, and it takes up to 3 months for it to completely dissipate. The shocking facts, Mr. Speaker, is that Colorado sold $14.6 million worth of marijuana in January of 2015, the month of January, and in the month of January 2016, they sold $36.4 million. So that's more than double, and to me, you double the amount of impaired driving. This means we need to double the amount of money that we're going to spend on education. Now, this government has told us that they're going to spend a certain amount. Well, we know that as soon as this comes out and becomes legal, the increased use of marijuana is going to at least double. You know, Mr. Speaker, the legislation in Bill C-46 has some good intentions, and I don't disagree with it. But it needs to be reviewed with more scrutiny. It needs to be looked at. We need to get rid of a lot of the ambiguous parts that are written into there, because it is just going to tie up police officers on the road, and it's going to make it very difficult for us to enforce impaired driving, especially with drugs. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Dauphin, Dauphin Swan River, Neepawa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to commend my colleague for his speech and his years of service in law enforcement. He's truly a tremendous addition to our caucus, and his wise counsel is very important to us. I'd like to ask him a question. Is there any, through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask my colleague, is there any test available to determine the concentration of drugs in a person's body?
Member for Yellowhead.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for that question. You know, it has been stated in this House that there are certain tests being done in certain countries that have accepted them, that we have been doing some tests in Canada with certain police officers, but yet we stand here and we have a government that wants to put a legislation forth, and we're getting close to, what do we got, 7 months to go? And yet we do not have an approved test in this country that is approved scientifically, that is going to guarantee us that the results that is given on that roadside screening test is right. So we need to have that done prior to putting the legislation out there and prior to setting people up in Canada for criminal convictions. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure the member across the way would acknowledge that Canada has the highest youth engagement in the consumption of cannabis or marijuana than virtually any other Western country in the world, including the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and so forth. So we know that our youth are engaged in the consumption of marijuana and cannabis. And I am sure the member, being a police officer, is very much aware that there are people that are smoking cannabis and are driving their vehicles. Is he trying to tell Canadians that there is no way in which someone can actually be detected, or that the Stephen Harper government did absolutely nothing to ensure that the people that are impaired by drugs were being minimized? I think that's the impression that the member across the way is trying to give listeners, and I'm wondering if he could provide any sort of assurances that, in fact, we do have law enforcement branches and agencies that are fairly effective at what they're doing at keeping our streets safer, and this legislation will actually assist into the future. And maybe if the member could just share with us what happens today or while Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, when someone is high on marijuana or cannabis and is caught behind driving a car.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend across for that question. First of all, when Mr. Harper was Prime Minister, our government was not wasting its time on a ridiculous legislation of making marijuana legal. We were more involved in making crimes more serious, so offenders paid for the crimes they did. And we were looking at the most serious crimes in Canada decreased. Now, I'm not saying that there is no test for marijuana for impaired driving, because I charged a person back in 1970 for using marijuana, and I used the simple, old-fashioned way of looking at his eyes, physical symptoms, etc. In Canada, we have approximately 600 police officers that are trained to recognize impairment by drugs. We have 65,000 policemen across Canada, so we have roughly 60,000 people, police officers that are not trained properly to go stand up in the courtroom and say that person was impaired. We have about 600, yet we're bringing legislation in 7 months down the road. And how are we going to train enough officers to be able to detect them when they have that marijuana if the device that the Attorney General may approve, it's not approved, may approve, it's written right in there. Thank you.